Hello YouTube. Tamriel has had many kings, emperors and other rulers, but today we're going to talk about 4 merchant lords and ladies who in their day controlled all the trade routes in the Abyssinian Sea and held an iron grip on the trade of illegal goods across the entire region. They were the de facto rulers of a city on the southern coast of Hammerfell, and their story is quite an interesting one, so let's immediately kick off. In the waning years of the Reman Empire in the Second Era, when the empire was ruled by the last of the so-called Akaviri potentates, 4 mercantile factions emerged in the city of Abbas Landing on the southern coast of Hammerfell. These 4 factions were the Ad Adin Syndicate, House Vienne, the Tazar Cartel and Gurgis and Associates. These 4 merchants factions, also called the Merchants' Houses, established themselves in the city as initially legitimate businesses, who became so big that they basically controlled everything that went in and out of the city. However, these 4 houses became so powerful that they each became more powerful and influential than the city's own government. For a while this went relatively well, but when the last ruler of the Reman Empire was assassinated along with all his heirs, the empire collapsed and thus Imperial authority vanished from Hammerfell. This meant that the 4 merchant houses could take political control of the city as well, and they then formed a group of 4 who would henceforth rule the city and controlled most of the trade going on in the Abyssinian Sea. At this time, without Imperial authority to keep them in check, the 4 merchant houses slowly became more and more corrupt, shifting away from their legal businesses into more profitable, less legal enterprises. And the city of Abbas Landing became a cesspool of crime and illegal activities, a haven for pirates and a strategic location for controlling the trade routes of southern Hammerfell, since the 4 merchant houses now expanded their influence. The so-called Ad Adin Syndicate, which had originally been founded as a trading guild of sorts by their founder Afshur Ad Adin, became one of the biggest arms dealers on Western Tamriel during that period, with the lowest standards for their clientele, selling high-quality weapons to pirates, slave traders and skooma cartels, accepting payments in stolen goods, which it then laundered and sells on for profits. It also commissions those same pirates who buy from them and plunder for them to ship their weapons to the far reaches of Tamriel to other shady customers who buy from the Ad Adin Syndicate. As according to the lore, the syndicate is one of the few ways that criminals and gangs and other less than legal organizations can buy armor and weapons that are actually of really high quality, as the syndicate peddles in weapons made by Tamriel's most skilled craftsmen, who likely never consented to their work being sold by the syndicate, obviously. Their leader in the Second Era around the time of the Elder Scrolls Online is a man called Orahan Ad Adin, a descendant of their founder, who has also started to use the syndicate as a way to become a fixer of sorts for the pirate contracts in the city. Basically, you need something done on the high seas, you go to him and he arranges a contract with one of the pirates that buy weapons from him, for a small fee to cover his own expenses. Of course. Now, during the 3 Banners War between the Daggerfall Covenant, the Ebonheart Pact and the Altmerry Dominion, he profits of all 3 sides by selling each weapons under the table, while in public staying neutral in the conflict. Because of Orahan's tactics and expansion of his businesses, he is the only one of the 4 merchant lords who have not been significantly weakened by the time of the Elder Scrolls Online. You see, some years before our playtime, the first Tamrielic Thieves Guild was founded in Abbas Landing. Although it's not the first thieves organization, it was actually the first thieves guild with actual rules and tenets in the way that we know them to be in, other Elder Scrolls games. This thieves guild was much like the other relatively unorganized thieves organizations around Tamriel. In Abbas Landing they mostly did small jobs and shook down the city's middle class, but when an ambitious man named Nicholas came to power, everything changed, as he decided to aim the Thieves Guild's efforts towards the merchant lords who had long ruled the city and held the most wealth. With the combined power of the Thieves of Abbas Landing under Nicholas and criminals from all over Hammerfell's underworld who were attracted by the promises of an organized Thieves Guild under Nicholas's strict rule, they managed to force the merchant lords of the city to their knees. You see, this first Thieves Guild, after their takeover by Nicholas, started to actively try and profit off the merchant lords' businesses by robbing warehouses, stealing shipments and stealing valuables from the merchant lords' mansions. And the merchant lords, who didn't particularly enjoy that, started a behind-the-scenes struggle for control over Abbas Landing with the organized criminals of the Thieves Guild, trying to hunt them down and put an end to this permanent leeching of their profits. The Thieves Guild actually managed to win this struggle though, through intimidation, fear and clever espionage, which allowed them to sabotage the merchant lords and absolutely humiliate them by rendering them powerless for a bit. Lore details are a bit hazy at this point, but it seems that a sort of mutual understanding was reached between the merchant lords and the Thieves Guild, in which it seems that the merchant lords would stop trying to kill any criminal not aligned with them in the streets, since they were just basically killing all the criminals in the streets as if they were Thieves Guild, in exchange for which the Thieves Guild would stop trying to sabotage all their businesses. And at the same time, the leader of the Thieves Guild, Nicholas, would be welcomed at the meetings of the merchant lords, meaning that the guild itself essentially became a secret fifth house of the city, as they now had a say in the rule of the city. After this point, thoroughly humiliated, the merchant lords would never become as profitable as they once were, as the Thieves Guild, practically unhindered due to the accord, stole a percentage of all their businesses from their warehouse, a percentage which Nicholas would call a tax that would make sure their businesses would be able to continue. Now, except for the At-Adin Syndicate, which managed to stay relatively profitable due to it having its own robust mercenary force and the profitable Three Banners War adding to its coffers, all the other merchant houses were severely weakened after their clash with the Thieves Guild, with one of them, Gurgis and Associates, almost completely disappearing. You see, Gurgis and Associates were an organization made up of bankers, originally formed by retired pirate Isabel Gurgis, who had used her pirate winnings to essentially start a bank for loans, as this is essentially a faction of loan sharks who impose really high interest rates on their clients. As profits grew, Isabel Gurgis expanded the business into gambling houses, fencing and laundering stolen items and cargo hijacking. However, as the Thieves Guild sabotaged their businesses and loans were not paid back, their power and influence fell incredibly fast, and they've only barely managed to survive the crisis, having lost hundreds of employees, locations and goons in the process. Their leader in the Second Era during our playtime is a descendant of Isabel Gurgis named Martinius Gurgis, who is described as being a bitter and jealous old man who can't accept how far his business has fallen and wants to restore it to its former glory despite not having the resources to pull it off. Now, the remaining two merchant houses that we still have to talk about that both survived the coup by the Thieves Guild have both nonetheless gotten far less profitable, as the Thieves Guild managed to severely leech off their profits. The first of these two is the so-called Tazar cartel, founded by the Khajiit named Tazar Ra, a slave trader dealing in her own kind, so in Khajiit slaves. According to legend, she was an incredibly greedy type who would sell her own family members as slaves if the profit was high enough. From Abbas Landing, she led a cartel which sold Khajiit and Argonian slaves in a network spanning all of Tamriel, from Somerset all the way to Morrowind. Due to the Thieves Guild at that time giving relatively free rein to their members in what they can steal from the lords, and most members of the guild abhorring slavery, some of them even being former slaves, the Tazar cartel, now led by the Khajiit called Tazar Goldfang, got hit quite hard by the Thieves Guild coup and continues to lose many of its profits, as the members of the Thieves Guild often free their slaves and steal the payments that they received for the slaves. Now, the final merchant organization of the four is called House Vienne, founded by Lady Felice Vienne around the time of the disintegration of the Riemann Empire. It's an organization which peddles drugs around the city, operates illegal brothels and inns which semi-openly serve drugs next to drinks. As such, House Vienne operates the so-called pleasure sector of the city and therefore also remains relatively profitable, as a lot of pirates and other scum make the city of Abbas Landing their home, who all intend to use these services. Now, due to an accident in the Thieves Guild almost a year before the events of the Elder Scrolls Online, the guild suddenly lost a lot of its power as it got hunted down by an organization called the Iron Wheel, and their leader Nicholas also disappeared. We will talk at length about the events of this questline in a later video covering the Thieves Guild questline of the Elder Scrolls Online, so people can play that unspoiled when they watch this video. Although one small spoiler that I have to give is that due to the events of that questline, the Thieves Guild gets very strong contacts with a very high-placed noble from the Kingdom of Taneth, which for years had suffered under the thumb of the merchant lords who had controlled the trade routes to the Kingdom of Taneth, and as a result sapped its resources for years. Now, this noble would from then on finance the Thieves Guild so it would keep the merchant lords in check for them, while at the same time this Thieves Guild would have the resources to expand, eventually growing to spread all across Tamriel, becoming the source for the organized Thieves Guilds that we find in the other games. But that's a story best saved for a video on the origins of the Thieves Guild. But that means that this video has basically come to an end, since that's all that I can tell you about the Merchant Lords. Now, I sincerely hope that you learned something new about the Elder Scrolls lore today, and if you did, consider subscribing and returning for the next Elder Scrolls lore video, or watch any of my previous videos, like the video that I made on Tamriel's illegal goods. That one is pretty good, and it gives you an insight into the kind of goods that were flowing through Abba's Landing around this time. Now, all that remains me to do now is to thank my top Patreon supporters, Mr. Bernardo Binda, Gabriel Binda, Polarized Putin, Athena Iodis, Dragonborn of Nerevar, Volcure of Argonia, King Chris, Bulge, Scribe of the Scrolls, Doji, Fenrir, Sword of Bushido, Rakai, and Mr. Christmas. It's thanks to these people and all the others on screen that this channel stays alive, and for that I'm very grateful. That said, I hope to see all of you in the next Elder Scrolls lore video. Bye bye. By the way, if you're still watching, tell me in the comments what you think of my new microphone. Do you hear anything new or no? Not at all. Like, I upgraded to a far better microphone and I have the idea that I don't hear it, but maybe you hear it. Bye.